Musical biopics have really been picking up steam over the last few years. From Bob Dylan to Queen to Jimi Hendrix, it seems that all kinds of musicians have been getting their own movies. But plenty of music legends have still been left out in the cold. Here are a few of the musicians who really deserve their own movies. Before they became arguably the most important figures in rap music, Joseph Simmons, Daryl McDaniels, and Jason Mizell were just a bunch of dudes from Queens who found themselves enamored of New York's burgeoning hip-hop scene. Simmons and McDaniels had been acquainted since kindergarten but were brought closer by their mutual love of rhymes and the fact that McDaniels had his own turntables. Resolving to form a group, they figured they'd call themselves the Dynamic Two until Simmons' older brother Russell, who had agreed to manage them, put a fork in that idea. Speaking with the New York Times, McDaniels explained he called and said, "You're going to be Run-D.M.C. It sounded like the worst name in the world. We said, "You're ruining us." McDaniels turned out to be wrong. Recruiting well-known Queens DJ Mizell, the trio blazed a trail with their first 3 records and changed rap forever. A biopic based on the group could have a lot of fun focusing on all the seemingly career-killing choices that set them apart. They eschewed flamboyant, disco-y garb in favor of jeans and leather jackets, stripped down their music to practically nothing but drums and shouted vocals, and had the gall to employ elements of rock into the genre before any of their contemporaries. Of course, there was also enough drugs, drinking, and conflict during their heyday to add some classic second-act drama, including a late career turn to religion for Joseph Simmons. Just don't let Aerosmith play themselves. Musical pioneers always make for good biopic fodder, and you can't pioneer much harder than Black Sabbath did. Formed in 1968 as the Polka Tulk Blues Band, the boys eventually changed their name to the slightly less ridiculous Earth, and were busy bluesing it up around Birmingham when fate intervened. Guitarist Tony Iommi suffered an industrial accident that de-tipped the fingers of his fretting hand, a career-ending injury for any guitarist. But he compensated by tuning his axe down a half step to provide some slack, resulting in a sound nobody had quite heard before. Then singer Ozzy Osbourne and bassist Geezer Butler penned a dark, scary tune entitled Black Sabbath, and suddenly heavy metal kicked in the womb. The band would go on to lay down a path for every metal band since, while simultaneously puzzling critics, enraging anyone with religious leanings, and doing more drugs than most human beings can handle. There's almost too much material for a biopic here. Osbourne's exploits alone are legendary, but his leaving the band for a stellar solo career, along with the tragic death of his guitarist Randy Rhoads, could also provide some strong dramatic beats, and the tenure of vocalist Ronnie James Dio in Sabbath deserves a close look as well. Osbourne's triumphant return to the band at 1997's Ozfest could even cap the whole thing off. With any luck, Ozzy's reality show years would end up on the cutting room floor.
Gosh, you are so tired. Come on, seriously, let's go and lie down for an hour.
No, I can't do.
The raucous, booze-soaked early years of famous bands always make for good biopic material, and not many bands were more booze-soaked and raucous than Metallica. They practically invented thrash metal as teenagers, dropping perhaps the most aggressive musical style anyone had yet seen right on the world's face, and somehow parlayed that into becoming the biggest band on Earth. Along the way, the band endured its fair share of drama, because, as the documentary Some Kind of Monster revealed, the personalities in the band tend toward the petulant and dysfunctional. This was a band full of flagrant drunks who kicked out guitarist Dave Mustaine for drinking too much. Their steady rise to fame was also threatened by a horrific bus accident that claimed the life of original bassist Cliff Burton. And then Burton's replacement, Jason Newsted, was also in constant conflict with the other members, to the point that his contribution to 1988's And Justice for All was mixed so low as to be nearly inaudible. And just when it seemed like they'd gotten as mainstream as a thrash metal band could get, they hooked up with producer Bob Rock for 1991's Metallica, which, with its slightly more accessible sound, sold an unspeakable number of copies and made them international superstars. And you could probably just fade to black there, because Metallica got a lot less dramatic once they sobered up. The story of Van Halen is chock full of possible avenues for dramatization. There are the early years, which saw guitarist Eddie Van Halen developing the highly unconventional playing techniques that would later make him a guitar god. Then there was the meet cute with vocalist David Lee Roth, a famously limited singer who nonetheless absolutely owned the stage. And there was also that early demo, financed by Gene Simmons of Kiss. These are all great biopic beats, and you could even end the flick with the band achieving world dominance with their landmark album 1984. Or, if you wanted a 4-hour movie, you could sidle on through to Roth's 1985 fallout with the band and the tenure of vocalist Sammy Hagar, during which things got a little weird and the band became even bigger. Despite the Hagar years being the band's most commercially successful, they were marked by the kind of nastiness and infighting that, while unfortunate, does make for great drama. A biopic could revisit Hagar's dramatic break from the band, the ill-fated and brief tenure of singer Gary Cherone, the subsequent on-again, off-again with Roth, and Eddie's onstage freakouts. Of course, after all that, there would be no triumphant finale, since for the last 20 years or so, the band has just kind of soldiered on through tours and albums whenever they can tolerate each other long enough to do so. In contrast to those early years, it's actually been kind of depressing. Everyone knows Phil Collins is a legend. But if you only know him for making you wonder what a sussudio is, then you don't know enough. Collins is one of the most respected drummers in rock. He manned the skins for Genesis, a wildly inventive prog rock band with drum parts that would make lesser drummers put their heads right through their snares. Then, when lead singer Peter Gabriel left and took his uber-distinctive voice with him, Collins stepped up to sing lead, and not only killed it, but took Genesis from proggy weirdos to one of the biggest pop bands of the 80s. Of course, we all know that he went on to an even more successful solo career. But did you know that he helped invent the gated snare drum sound which practically defined the 80s? That innovation is what makes perhaps the single most memorable bar of drumming ever on In the Air Tonight so memorable. He was also the only artist to play at both Live Aid concerts, performing a solo set in London before hopping on a Concorde to sing and sit in on drums for Led Zeppelin in Philadelphia. He's a consummate professional, a badass in some truly unexpected ways, and has more career highlights than you can shake a stick at. What more could you want? Many biopics fascinate audiences because they delve into the personal lives of their subjects, showing us sides of their favorite artists that they'd never seen before. But if Prince were ever to be immortalized on film, this wouldn't really be the case because Prince didn't have much of a personal life. By all accounts, the man lived, breathed, and ate music, composing a song a day on average and rarely ever taking breaks. With Prince, what you saw was what you got, but his career still contained a wealth of moments ripe for dramatization. In his early years, there was controversy over his notoriously dirty mind, brought about by albums like, well, Controversy and Dirty Mind. This spiraled into full-blown hysteria when the government of the time went to war with music, a conflict instigated by the Purple One's so-called pornographic lyrics to Darling Nikki from his seminal 1984 release Purple Rain. After that, he stoked tensions with his label by changing his name to an unpronounceable symbol. A biopic could also touch on the hits he wrote for other artists and his many stellar collaborations, and would surely have to end with George Harrison's posthumous Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, at which Prince paid tribute with one of the most blindingly amazing guitar solos ever performed.
Oh, how rude of me. I haven't given you enough time to freak out yet. You may do so now.
The great part about a David Bowie biopic is that it'd be like 6 different biopics in one. You could start off with his early years playing around in local bands, under his real name Davy Jones before he changed it to avoid confusion with the monkey of the same name. After his first solo album went nowhere, he spent a while at a Buddhist monastery, and then formed his own mime troupe, and you still haven't hit the really interesting parts yet. Throughout the 1970s, Bowie made a habit of completely overhauling his image every time fans started to think they had him pinned down. The spacey image of his first 3 albums gave way to full-on alienhood in the form of perhaps his most famous persona, Ziggy Stardust. That lasted all of a year before he glammed it up for his next couple releases. Then there was a segue into his slick, businesslike Thin White Duke persona in the late 70s, a period during which he scored his first #1 US hit. Finally, in the early 80s, he decided to throw off all the pomp and became a full-fledged pop star, recruiting the legendary Stevie Ray Vaughan to play lead guitar on the monster smash hit album Let's Dance, which is as good a place to wrap up the story as it is a great name for his biopic. In the wake of Bohemian Rhapsody's success, a Bowie-focused movie has actually been announced, but the movie is unlikely to have any of Bowie's music or the family's blessing. Any film detailing the life and times of Janis Joplin would have to start from her childhood because her life, unfortunately, was famously short. However, there's plenty to mine for inspirational beats here. She grew up singing in a church choir and was bullied throughout school for her weight and acne, which she later overcame to become one of the most powerful singers of her time. After a couple of unsuccessful stints in college, she made a name for herself in the early 60s by sitting in with folk singers and generally blowing them all out of the water. A performance at the 1963 Monterey Folk Festival turned out not to be the big break she needed, and she almost gave up on music before being recruited by San Francisco-based Big Brother and the holding company right before that city's music scene totally exploded. A return to Monterey for the 1967 Pop Festival finally got the attention of record execs, and her vocals work on Big Brother's 1968 album Cheap Thrills made her a bona fide star. Of course, the requisite drugs, alcohol, and infighting all became factors, and Joplin would only produce 2 more solo albums before her untimely death in 1970. It's a classic story of struggle, hard living, blowing up fast, and dying young. Joplin's big personality and even bigger voice surely deserve the Hollywood treatment. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.